One night, when I was a young child, I was perusing the internet through different sites and online forum boards. That was until I came across a video clip. It was from an animated movie I had never seen before. It featured a group of soldiers, clad in heavy armor with sinister red eyes wielding German MG42 machine guns, who were absolutely decimating a group of gunmen. And watching this scene, I was immediately captivated by the sheer brutality on display. There was something so real and awesome about this scene. Whether that was the ultra-violent way people were getting gunned down, or from its animation, which had a level of seriousness and realism to it that I had never seen before. Nevertheless, this was my first experience with Jin Roh, the Wolf Brigade, a movie I have come to love for most of my life. Jin Roh is an anime that is a diamond in the rough. It's a bit obscure, all things considered, coming from 1999 and from the mind of Mamoru Oshii. Mamoru Oshii almost doesn't need an introduction. He has sent waves through the anime industry and has played a major hand in establishing Japanese animation as a medium to be reckoned with compared to the global powerhouse that is Hollywood. From working on the first ever OVA Dallos to directing landmark series like Urusei Yatsura and the Patlabor movies. But most importantly, his previous project to this one being 1995's Ghost in the Shell, the anime movie adaptation of the manga of the same name. This was a movie that exploded in popularity worldwide, with Ghost in the Shell not just having a profound and interesting story, but becoming a part of pop culture, even influencing Western movies like The Matrix. Mamoru Oshii isn't a person who is chained down to a single style. Every one of his works feels distinct from one another in near all aspects. But if there was one way I had to describe all of his works, I'd say that they're all meditations. They're stories that you're meant to watch closely and take in all the little details, where the intention of them is to leave an impact with the audience, where you'd find yourself still thinking about it long after the credits roll. Ghost in the Shell depicted a highly advanced cyberpunk future where humanity and machine are almost one and the same. It dealt with ideas of transhumanism, AI life forms, and finding meaning in existence. It's an experience that leaves viewers often a way to reflect on themselves more so than the characters in that story. And then there's Angel's Egg, an experimental and psychedelic experience like no other, that through its strange imagery and almost nonsensical moments, shows the real struggles Mamoru Oshii had with losing his faith in religion, as he depicts a world where the Ark turned over as humanity died off in a black sea of nothing. This was a film that was designed to make you think more so than be entertained. And Jin Roh is in the same boat with these types of films, where by the end of it you're left in a state thinking over what you've just seen. Jin Roh takes place in an alternate history Japan where mass civil unrest and terrorism threaten the country. It depicts an authoritarian fascist paramilitary police unit called the Special Unit, or the Kerberos Unit. And it shows us what a society and systems of oppression like this do to people within it. And more specifically, how these systems force people to lose their humanity. So, not a lot of people know this, but Jin Roh is actually the third installment of a trilogy of movies called the Kerberos Saga. But unlike Jin Roh, these are live-action movies. And in fact, Jin Roh is technically a prequel movie to the others. Each of these movies were directed by Mamoru Oshii, with the first in 1987 called The Red Spectacles, and a follow-up in 1994 called Stray Dogs. Now these films aren't really connected in any way, they're more just stories that come from this world, but both of these films depict ex-Kerberos soldiers trying to move on from their pasts, only to be haunted by them and subsequently pulled back into them in one way or another. Now, while these movies aren't connected, something unanimous in all of these is the color red, with red often being symbolic to characters in some way, normally representing what they want and what they desire or a dream they're trying to chase, but something nonetheless that is unobtainable, which is only offset by the Kerberos armor's haunting red eyes, something they can't seem to escape. And if anything, it's the only red they can ever seem to have. Now, these movies are very hard to find, especially in good quality, and while I personally do like and enjoy them for what they are, I'm gonna be real, they're not that good.
Double kill. Triple kill. Unfriggin' believable.
At best, they are definitely an acquired taste. There are moments in these films where it will go from really serious story to having some cartoonish, cheesy-ass scene that feels really out of place considering these films' somewhat serious tones. These films definitely have an identity crisis. The stories are also confusing and are a little muddy, not helped by the strange editing. Along with some overacting in some parts, it makes these films feel a little too silly. But surprisingly, Jin Roh is the most grounded out of all of them. This is a very serious movie, and was originally going to be a live action like the others, but later had that change to be made into an animation. And the fact that this was originally meant to be live action can be felt throughout the movie, from stuff like Jin Roh's overall animation style being way more grounded than pretty much any other anime out there, with its characters looking like actual people. There are no giant eyes or exaggerated facial features here. Everyone looks like a person who could exist. And then there's Jin Roh's amazing attention to detail and its dedication to realism, which is best seen through Jin Roh's haunting depictions of violence and urban chaos. Whether that is a street riot where things feel chaotic and scrappy, all the way to when there is an armed Kerberos soldier mowing through people with an MG42 that feels calculated and proficient. Because when people get shot in this, they go limp, and then their bodies flail around and are animated to show the ragdoll of each individual bullet subsequently coming in contact with it, leaving bodies as a pulverized mess. This movie has left such an impact on me. Whenever I see an MG42 in a game, I just have to use it, even when I know that I'm probably going to get no kills with it. And I have a very specific memory of when I first played Far Cry 4. I was still quite young at the time, and when I unlocked the buzzsaw, which was literally the most powerful weapon in the game, I went, oh my god, it's the Jin Roh gun.
A soy beverage is a liquid legume.
But as much as I can gush over Jin Roh's armor and action scenes, that's not the main reason I love this film so much. What I remember Jin Roh for is the intimate moments characters share, the moments where they ponder over their place in this world, where they reflect on who they are and the actions they've committed, giving those action scenes so much more weight and meaning. Because through Jin Roh's government espionage, internal power struggles, heart-pounding action, and gruesome imagery, there is a somber story at the heart of it. Or should I say, the story of Kazuki Fuse, a man who right from the start of the movie is given a choice that will come to define who he is and where his place in the world will be. So, I probably should mention this. 1, major spoilers for Jin Roh, and 2, as much as I personally love this movie, I should also mention that it isn't for everyone. Jin Roh isn't an action movie. There are only really 3 fights in this, and one is just a training drill where all they do is walk up some stairs. The film is quite slow, with lingering shots and imagery accompanied by an orchestral soundtrack that kind of make it this dreamlike experience, which for some might come off a little tiresome, especially considering some of the other choices this film makes in terms of storytelling, that I will just plainly admit are flat out bad. Stuff like an overly long exposition dump right at the start that explains the world but not in an interesting or diegetic way. It is just a PowerPoint slideshow from the Fallout games. There are many characters and factions in this story that on a single viewing can be hard to follow. But to be fair, some aren't really the focus. There are some elements that are barely represented or shown to us and are just told to us through dialogue. And then there are certain scenes and elements that feel really honed in and forced, like the whole Little Red Riding Hood stuff, which you are going to be hearing a lot of. But for me, these don't matter, because Jin Roh still has so much that makes it memorable, with it having an incredible journey that builds to a satisfying yet somber conclusion. But before we get too deep into this, I think it is important that we understand where Jin Roh comes from, because Jin Roh does actually reflect a small part of real Japanese history. In World War II, Japan was a part of the Axis powers, and was a very militarized, nationalist, and authoritarian country. But after the end of World War II and the subsequent American occupation, those ideologies were almost completely extinguished. That was until 1960. In 1960, Japan was in a very politically hot climate. America had ended their occupation in 1952. However, Japan and America had a security treaty between the two of them that had been set in place since the end of World War II. This treaty allowed for America to maintain a permanent military presence on the island. America were allowed to dispatch soldiers overseas from their bases in Japan and enact peacekeeping by quelling domestic protests on Japanese soil, both without consulting the Japanese government. And they weren't obliged to help Japan if they were attacked or invaded by a third party. This is where the at the time current Prime Minister of Japan, Nobusuke Kishi, comes into play. Now, Kishi was a very controversial figure to say the least. He was a known war criminal for his involvement in the Imperial Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo, where he exploited Chinese slave labor. And little known fact, he's actually the grandfather of the late Shinzo Abe.
It was my grandfather, Nobusuke Kishi, who signed it.
At the time, Kishi represented the right-leaning party of Japan, the Liberal Democratic Party, and Kishi wanted to revise the security treaty with America. The proposed revised treaty would allow for America to maintain their military presence in Japan, however, it would commit them to protect Japan if any third party were to invade. It would also make America no longer able to quell domestic protests, and they would have to consult with the Japanese government if they were ever to deploy American troops overseas from their bases in Japan. This was all tied with an initial 10-year term where the treaty could be repealed by either party with a 1-year notice. This proposed revisal didn't go well with the majority of the population, with most not wanting an American military presence at all. There was already a hatred spreading for the American military after a few incidents, including where an American Air Force soldier, William S. Girard, killed a lone woman scavenging for scrap metal for his own amusement. But most saw this treaty as a way to return Japan to its authoritarian, militarized climate similar to that of World War II. And with the war still being fresh in the heads of many, and with the looming threat and rising tensions of the Cold War at the time, many Japanese saw this treaty as a way to rope Japan into the Cold War, a conflict they didn't want a part of. Kishi, facing a lot of public backlash and in fear of mass protests, attempted and failed to pass his police duties bill, which would have given the police a lot more power, with the right for warrantless search and seizure and the ability to deal with civilian protests in a hope to target them. This only fueled the fire, which all combined and led to mass civilian protests in the streets. These protests became known as the Ampo protests, with people fearing a country that could force its people back into a conflict, reminiscent of the fascist and authoritarian days of World War II. This was until the May 19th incident, where Kishi in the National Diet got police to remove every seated member of the opposing party, one by one, until he had a room consisting of only his party, which ended in a unanimous vote in favour of the treaty. This tactic wasn't only hated by pretty much everyone, but even members of Kishi's own party, for his blatantly anti-democratic actions. This marked a change, making these protests no longer just about the treaty, but also outing Kishi. The protests continued up until June 15th, where hundreds of thousands of protesters gathered out front of the National Diet, until a group of ultra-nationalist right-wing supporters rammed protesters with their trucks, and then, armed with nail boards, descended into the protests, causing a riot. The police then stepped in, no longer standing by as the protests had now turned violent. In the chaos, a Tokyo University student, Michiko Kanba, was trampled to death. In the following days, news outlets that were once in favour of the protests now were demonising both sides, calling for an end to ensure the violence would stop. While Kishi inevitably did step down on July 15th, the protests continued right up until the final day, when the treaty was signed. This was the single largest protest in modern Japanese history. It was a time when people feared what could happen if someone like Kishi would push the country in the wrong direction. Kishi represented a far-right authoritarian fascist ideology that many Japanese, both right and left-leaning, did not like. One quite similar to that World War II Japan had, which Kishi was a part of, where its people were forced to fight and die for the good of the nation. It was a country that didn't care for its people and used them to achieve success at the expense of their lives, in more ways than one. The Ampo protests were the beginning of a few incidents to follow. The riot on June 15th only strengthened the right-leaning extremists in the country, leading to more violent activism, including the live television assassination of the chairman of the Japanese left-leaning Socialist Party, Inejiro Asanuma, who was well on his way to becoming the next prime minister due to his for-the-people attitude and down-to-earth nature. There was a second Ampo protest in 1970, after that first 10-year term was up, with many still wanting the treaty revoked. This protest wasn't nearly as large as the 1961, and still didn't have any effect, with the treaty still being renewed. It's also worth mentioning that Mamoru Oshii was a part of the second wave of protests. Just like many in the 1960s, he feared a dark outcome for the country. The outcome Oshii and many others feared was a country that was more concerned with maintaining power than the well-being of its people. A country that would use its citizens without care for their well-being. Jin Roh the Wolf Brigade is a direct reflection of the world that Oshii feared. A world that would abandon and isolate us purely for selfish purposes, where police and governments are more concerned with their mandate of power than the state of their people. It's interesting because Jin Roh takes a very different approach to portraying a world that many in the country feared at the time. Instead of it taking place in a dystopian future, it takes place in an altered past. In this timeline, Japan sided with the Allies during World War II, but still lost. This time with the Germans taking occupation, and forcing a harsh reformment strategy of rapid industrialization and economic growth. This left many without jobs and in poor living conditions. Mass urban migration led to many cities becoming slums. It wasn't long until civil unrest broke out, with people openly protesting and rioting in want of reform for the country. In this time, many terrorist groups emerged wanting to change the country through force. Japan had to step in. But under its new constitution, it had restrictions on its military power, so Japan chose to establish a paramilitary police organization, known as the Capital Police, with a heavily armed anti-terrorist unit attached, called the Special Unit, also known as the Kerberos Police. They immediately declared themselves as the guardians of public order. For years, the Special Unit waged war with terrorists and anti-government protests, turning the streets of Tokyo into an urban war zone. Enforcing the law under an iron boot, they committed many unlawful killings and did major damage to the city in the process. After much fighting, the terrorist groups were forced to combine into a single group called the Sect. But there are also rumors of some kind of secret group operating within the Special Unit, a group that don't work under the hand of the Capitol Police, but a rogue corp. They are only known as Jin Roh, translated to the Wolf Brigade, or at least they are rumored to be, as no one can confirm their existence. But after the Special Unit turned Tokyo into an urban war zone and enacted their harsh authoritarian power onto the people, the Capitol Police, and especially the Special Unit, lost a lot of public favor among the population and even standard law enforcement, with most people now demonizing the Kerberos Unit and the Sect in hopes for a better future. During one riot, the Sect let off a bomb, causing mass panic. This bomb was delivered by a young girl. The Sect used women and children to run their bombs as to not raise as much suspicion. These bomb runners are commonly referred to as Little Red Riding Hoods. After this bombing, the Kerberos Unit was sent into the sewers to intercept a terrorist shipment. This operation was a failure though, as Kazuki Fusei, a relatively new soldier in the Special Unit, came face to face with a little girl. He was given the order to shoot, but it was something he couldn't pull himself to do. In the aftermath of this incident, the Special Unit are slandered for screwing up the operation, and Fusei is left scarred, seeing the little girl in hallucinations and having flashes to the sewer incident. He is questioned by his superiors as to why he didn't pull the trigger, only to respond with, he doesn't know. He's subsequently forced back into training, but he still can't shake the fact that he was in part responsible for that little girl's death. Jin Roh's story and all of its elements are dark and feel real. It's not a story of over-the-top hijinks or really out-there concepts. This all comes from a very down-to-earth and real place, which is only elevated through its downright jaw-dropping animation, arguably the best part of the Jin Roh experience. Because Jin Roh's animation doesn't feel like anything else. It's incredibly unique and stylized while maintaining its commitment to realism, which makes a lot of sense because, like I said, this was originally going to be a live-action movie. Jin Roh has a high level of detail to near all of its elements. Near everything has been modeled with detail and has its own unique texture. And environments aren't just these static locations, with near every scene having some form of movement involved. Crowds of people walk the sidewalks while cars, bikes, and trams move through the streets. People aren't just static objects, they make small movements that would be natural for a human to make. And then small individual objects are animated in the environments, giving this movie an insane level of depth, as in the backgrounds of most scenes there is some form of movement. This all reinforces the notion that Fusei and other characters aren't really the center of this world. They're just small fish in a much larger ocean. This world will keep moving without them. And the alternate history Tokyo is never the center point of this movie, but there's so much detail poured into this that help establish it as this real, lived-in place, even though we never get to fully explore it. Like how there is a mixture of German and Japanese culture in the city. It's seen in their clothes, their uniforms, the cars they drive, and the weapons they use all being German-made weapons. And then there's subtle background information like homelessness, protest marches, little destroyed buildings, construction work off in the distance to some of the differing architecture seen in the city that all give this world a subtle but unique identity. But this attention to detail is best seen through the Kerberos armor, being heavily plated at the front, leaving the rear almost completely exposed. Which makes sense because as a Kerberos soldier, you won't ever have your back to the enemy. They have a built-in night vision in the visors that give them those iconic red eyes, along with a rebreather and a communications antenna. And then there's a distinct insignia on each of the armor containing the initials of the wearer. On the left arm, there's a plate to position the ammo belt, to allow it to feed into the gun smoothly without interfering with the weapon's handling. And the ammo pack on the back dispenses small belts of ammunition, which makes sense as the MG42 had a severe overheating problem, leading to the guns getting damaged and needing constant maintenance. This is also referenced in a later scene where we can see Kazuki changing one of the barrels. And if you have never seen Jin Roh but think the soldiers look kinda familiar, it's because tons of media has used the Kerberos style as inspiration. The main ones to note being the Helghast from the Killzone games. Some of the soldiers and imagery used in the excellent modern Wolfenstein games is clearly inspired by Jin Roh. Even my beloved Fallout New Vegas Ranger veteran armor had some slight inspiration taken from the Kerberos armor, except they went in a different direction in the end, but certain parts still remain and you can kind of see the Kerberos armor within them, mainly the red eyes.
Patrolling the Mojave almost makes you wish to commit tax fraud.
What?
I just don't want to pay the NCR all my money.
But behind the red eyes of the Kerberos soldiers is a person. It's sometimes easy to forget that there is someone in each of those suits of armor, because they barely have any exposed human parts left, and barely any distinct factors between them, which almost reflects Fusei as a character, because we never really learn much about Fusei. The most we understand about him is through what we're shown. We see that he is an exceptionally skilled Kerberos soldier, having training with multiple weapons, close quarters combat, and being a tactical thinker when the time requires it, both in and out of the armor. But seeing that, it does bring into question, why didn't he pull the trigger if he's such a well-trained soldier? But besides from that, he's a very closed-off person who doesn't ever really open up. He's mostly silent and tends to be by himself where he can. And it's not just that he isolates from others, he feels isolated by other people. There's a scene shortly after he gets put back into training where he takes a tram cart into the city. We can see him looking intensely at the other people on the cart, studying them only to pull in, huddling himself. Almost as if he doesn't understand how to be a part of this world and be among normal humans. But you can tell through his cold exterior that he is unhappy with how the events played out in the tunnels. He's so shaken by the incident, he illegally gets information from a member of the Capitol Police Public Security Division about the little girl's identity. Now, the Public Security Division are a separate part of the Capitol Police, not related to the special unit. They act more like a counterintelligence and investigation agency rather than a militarized infantry squad. With this information, he goes to visit the grave of the little girl, only to find her older sister mourning over her grave. She shares a striking resemblance with her sister, even wearing a similar red outfit. Her name is Kei, and she immediately takes a liking to Fusei, going on a walk with him after she finds out who he is. Almost immediately, there's something not right about Kei. She has this almost blissful ignorance to her. She seems off in her own world and almost has a constant level-headed attitude. She doesn't care that Fusei killed her sister, stating that it was just a product of the situation. There was no good outcome to that, and he didn't really pull the trigger, so she took her own life. Which is a really adult way to look at things, but it's almost not natural. Nevertheless, Kei and Fusei from here spend more time together and have many dates throughout the movie, which is kind of the focus point for most of this movie, because through these two interactions, we can see the main idea of Jin Roh shine through, which is Fusei coming to terms with his humanity. He feels like he lost something, allowing that little girl to die. He didn't want to shoot her like he was told and trained to do, but also didn't want her to kill herself. He went to her grave out of an empty feeling he has, and through Kei, he sees some way for him to atone for what he's done. Fusei is a person who feels disconnected from the world, almost as if he doesn't feel a part of it. He barely interacts with anyone. Besides Kei, he only ever addresses his superiors, and that's only when he's ordered to. Even with his interactions with Kei, he barely talks or interacts with her. But he, for some reason, still stays with her, almost as if there's a part inside of him wanting to be with her. But sadly for him, that's not really possible. He's a part of the special unit, a group that will enact harsh and swift justice onto those who are deemed targets. When we first see Fusei, he is the same as all the other Kerberos soldiers, a blank slate with a cold, red gaze, no exposed skin or human features left. He's indistinguishable from any other Kerberos unit. It's hinted at throughout the movie, but when you adorn the Kerberos armor, you lose your connection to the world. You lose your humanity. Because in that line of work, you almost have to. The moment you have a connection and start asking questions, you become attached and you can't follow orders. You have to relinquish your humanity in order to be a part of the special unit. In fact, the best way to dehumanize someone is to remove their face. We as humans often look for facial features when understanding something because it's so ubiquitous with us. That's why in so many movies, basic grunts will never show their face. The moment you show someone's face, you've instantly humanized them. And you may feel bad about killing them, and the heroes may not look very heroic killing people. And that is where Jinro's connection to the Ampo protests come into play. Because Jinro takes place in an inherently fascist and authoritarian society, similar to the one the country feared as an outcome from the security treaty. When Germany took occupation in this world, they didn't force any of their harsh ideologies onto Japan. We never see concentration camps or a Night of the Long Knives type moment or any Nazis imagery at all. That's not a part of this story. But they did put a unit of government in similar to that of World War II Germany's, one very authoritarian, very militarized, and fascist, which is where the Kerberos unit actually comes from. They are modeled off of the German military of World War II, with the higher-ups of the unit dressing similar to that of members of the SS. And it goes further than looks, but actions. They are designed to maintain order through force, because this rendition of Tokyo is governed through violence. When Germany put their reformant policies in place and the civilian population rose up against it both verbally and physically in the streets, the Kerberos unit were established to forcefully quell these differing views in the public, mainly the extremist guerrilla groups, which, besides right at the start, aren't really a player in the story. When hearing about a story of fascism, it can often be interpreted as fascism versus communism or anarchism, but that's not really what the story is. It's more a look into a fascist and authoritarian society and how those systems dehumanize people to fit their ideologies. Because systems like this don't care about you as an individual. They don't want free thought or for you to counter their ideologies. All you are to them is a simple cog in the machine doing what you've been assigned to do. If you want to be a Kerberos soldier and maintain peace as the power that governs dictates, you have to strip yourself of your humanity. You have to blindly accept what you are doing, that you are quelling the little public opinion that opposes the power that governs. You have to accept the orders given to you that may include killing children if needed. And there's actually a scene that reflects this right at the start, where Fuse is told that having feelings in this line of work can only complicate things.
You know, I actually meant to shoot her.
Then why didn't you pull a trigger? Just forget about it. You can't let your emotions get the better of you and still do this kind of work. A wounded animal with no way to survive is not gonna make it.
There's a common symbolic metaphor through this movie where the Kerberos unit are portrayed as wolves, beasts not a part of the human world who simply follow orders of their masters. It's also fitting that the name Kerberos is derived from Greek mythology, with Cerberus being the three-headed dog that guards the gates to hell, a beast that maintains order in the most wicked place in existence. It's a little on the nose, but the wolf symbolism goes way further than just the name. As the case with the Little Red Riding Hood story, the Kerberos unit are portrayed as the big bad wolves of the story. Now, this movie isn't exactly subtle with its symbolism. The amount of times Little Red Riding Hood is referenced or imagery is used is almost every second scene. In fact, right after Kay and Fuse have their first meeting, she gives Fuse a copy of Little Red Riding Hood that she was actually going to put in her sister's grave, but thought Fuse could use it more. And right after that scene, we get a monologue of Kay reading the Red Riding Hood story, as Fuse and other Kerberos soldiers enact a training exercise. This all is basically spelling out to you that the Kerberos unit are the big bad wolves of the story.
I'm very hungry, Mother, she said. There's some meat in the cupboard. Have some, answered the wolf. It was the flesh of her mother, killed by the wolf.
Yeah, it's not subtle at all. In fact, this isn't the only anime I know of where they've actually tried to weave in a fairy tale directly into its narrative. And yeah, most other times this happens, it's a mixed result.
Oh, we're so sorry to hear about your brother that passed away. He gets 5 big booms. Boom! 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 Boom!
The Little Red Riding Hood story they read in this movie is a slightly altered version to the one I think most of us are familiar with, but Jinro still plays on the idea of how we interpret characters in that story. It's easy to see Fusei as the hero. He's a member of the Special Unit, a unit made for peacekeeping, and the sex girl is evil as she was working for a terrorist organization. But the movie takes on the idea that the Kerberos Unit and Fusei are the wolves of the story. They are evil creatures that will kill innocents. And when you start looking between the lines of this movie, you can start to see this viewpoint a lot more clearly. The Kerberos Unit aren't exactly heroes. I mean, the opening scene with them spells it out for you. They're more a forceful peacekeeping organization that will maintain order and the power that governs through any means, but always under that vague cover of the law. The Special Unit can enforce law and order in whatever overly aggressive way they see fit, and are always protected by the fact that, hey, they're just keeping the peace. And the way they maintain this order is by robbing people of their humanity to enact this peacekeeping. A criticism I've seen of this movie before is how Fusei doesn't really have much of a character. And yeah, he doesn't have a strong personality, I'll admit, but that's kind of the point. He's a person who's already conflicted with his place in the world and his humanity. But a fascist and authoritarian society would strip people of their humanity to create working soldiers that don't think and without question follow orders. Fusei is just a product of the world he's in. He's someone who's been conditioned to remove his humanity so he can uphold the power that governs, in whatever way that needs to be done. This is all shown to us in one of my favorite scenes of the movie, where Fusei has a waking nightmare. He finds himself back in the sewers with the little girl running away from him. As he chases her, wolves slowly fill the tunnel behind him. That is until he comes to a gate, and the little girl turns into Kay, stating that he can't come with her. He then unlocks the gate, and a swarm of wolves descend onto a fleeing Kay, and begin to viciously rip her apart as Fusei desperately tries to run after her. But as the wolves devour her, it's interchanged with imagery of Fusei now adorned in the Kerberos armor, gunning down Kay at point-blank range, with only the haunting red eyes of the Kerberos Unit illuminating the darkness behind him, all ending with Fusei screaming in terror as he fades into a shot of a lone wolf standing in the mountains, symbolizing what he will become if he stays with the Kerberos Unit. A wolf, not a man, stripped of humanity who will never be part of the human world again. This nightmare is what Fusei fears he will become, but he sees Kay as a cure for this vision. He sees her as some kind of redemption, or at least a way to atone for letting that girl die. And Kay seems to really like Fusei herself, almost to an unnatural degree, which sadly for him is true, because Kay isn't real. Or she is, but she's just a ploy. She's an ex-Little Red Riding Hood who the Capitol Police captured, and are going to use to manipulate Fusei into a conspiracy that will bring down the Special Unit. It's a little complicated and hard to follow on first viewing, but the Capitol Police have lost a lot of public favour over the years. Not only with them oppressing the public outcry, but also with the Special Unit having overly aggressive tactics that can cause significantly more damage. This hatred is felt through other government agencies, especially the local police, with them wanting the Capitol Police just flat out gone. Because while the local police and the Capitol Police have a co-policing agreement, they aren't under the same command and act individually of one another. Like I said, the Kerberos Unit are way more violent and aggressive with their tactics and overall law enforcement compared to the local police, which even the higher-ups in the Kerberos Unit understand all too well.
Listen, Anya, this ludicrous co-policing arrangement isn't working at all. Let's just end it. Besides, we're like oil and water. Put the two together and we wind up floating on top like filthy grease.
The Kerberos Unit intercepting the terrorist bomb transport at the start was something done in secret without notifying the local police. And to make things even worse, it wasn't handled well or contained, with Fusei letting the bomb go off. This explosion caused a blackout which made the local police lose control of the riot on the surface, all because the Special Unit acted on their own accord. But with the growing threat of organised terrorism, another new path must now be taken. One of a unified police unit. The local police want to combine with the Capitol Police's Public Security Division to create a unified organisation with a single chain of command, with them keeping all divisions except for the Special Unit. They must be removed due to all the negative publicity about them, and just with them overall not being as needed, with this new police organisation wanting to focus on less aggressive tactics. So a paramilitary policing unit wouldn't be as needed, but this is all being done behind the public's eye. Not even the main government knows of this, because in order for this to happen, someone needs to take the fall for the Special Unit, and Fusei has been chosen, with them using Kay to get close to him and lure him into a relationship. She isn't actually the little girl's sister, she simply looks like her, but with her being a captured terrorist bomb runner, they're going to use that to their advantage. with the final stage of the plan being to get Fusei to meet with Kei in the museum at night, where they will stage a photo shoot with Kei handing him a bag, the same one the terrorists use. If it were found out that the special unit had been working with terrorists, then the unit would be disbanded almost immediately, allowing for this new police organization to take up the reign. If you maybe find this confusing and want to look at this in a more simplified way, the whole confrontation and power struggle in this movie is purely to see who will come out on top. It's not really about ideologies or anything like that, it's purely a fight to see who will maintain power. It's kind of clear from the start that there's something not right about Kei, from the fact that she dresses like her sister to how blissful she acts, to the way she immediately takes an intimate liking to Fusei, to how she will randomly change conversations remarking on how it must be nice to be free like a bird. But that's also what Kei wants the most, to be free. If there's one thing that defines Kei, it's that she doesn't have a choice in any of this. If she doesn't work with the public security division and sell out Fusei, she will either be imprisoned or killed, as we've already seen. And even if she does follow her orders, what then? A public headline showing her, a terrorist, providing bombs to the special unit, with all the armed public security division members at the museum, it looks more like a firing squad than anything else. After they snag the photo, they'll probably gun down Kei and Fusei to not leave any witnesses. So for her, that want to earn back her freedom is all for nothing. Because deep down, she knows that there is no escape from this. The only thing she can really have now is Fusei. Because through the time they spend together, she does develop some real feelings towards him, seeing him as just a reflection of her, someone who's being used by the higher powers to achieve a goal none of them have a part in. And much like herself, Fusei is someone who doesn't belong in this world. He's isolated and broken. Through all the monologues she has with Fusei about being free and wanting to run away, she understands that that most likely won't ever happen, which is reflected just before the final fight where she says this line.
Together, then we would have been with each other. At least I know I would have had a place in your heart.
There's this really depressing tone throughout the whole movie, and that doesn't just come from its story, but more so its presentation. The sky is always overcast, the music is sad, even in the final fight, it doesn't feel like victorious music, but just kind of upsetting. And most importantly, the color palette is muted. There aren't too many high contrasting colors in this. The only time when there is a distinct amount of color on screen that doesn't seem as muted compared to the rest of the film is in the theme park. On one of Kei and Fusei's dates, Kei takes him to a rooftop theme park, a place that for some reason has way more contrasting colors than anywhere else in the movie. It all seems relatively normal at first, but it's in this scene that Kei talks to Fusei about how she wants to run away, to leave this place and become someone new. It's one of the very few times that her persona slips and she actually speaks her mind. And right after this, she asks Fusei why he's in the special unit, for him to give a pretty vague answer and say it's just where he belongs. This rooftop theme park is also where they return to later, after the Capitol Police begin to hunt them down from Fusei rescuing Kei from the museum. And in another scene where Kei is somewhat genuine, she opens up to Fusei about how she was a terrorist bomb runner, a Little Red Riding Hood, but she wasn't that little girl's sister. She was purely a plant because she looked similar, and they knew how Fusei was emotionally distraught after the event in the sewers. They've been playing him this whole time. But in this scene, once again, Kei expresses her dream to run away, far away from the city to a place no one will know her. Something that she does really want to do, and even getting excited when Fusei briefly mentions the notion of doing it, only for Fusei to then turn her down. But then, Fusei and Kei share one of their most intimate moments, where the two feel so similar to one another, and they realize the feelings they have for one another. They were both people being played by the world they're in, both being abused by systems of power they have no stakes in. Kei even sheds a tear, but not out of happiness, but sadness, knowing that she's still leading the Capitol Police to their location, and knows that they both aren't going to live through this. This moment for her is the final moment of happiness she'll ever really have. But there's something else special about this place. In fact, it's something that Jin Roh as a whole does that I find really interesting, which is how Jin Roh uses elevation to symbolize differing levels of society and humanity when reflecting the characters. The movie starts out in the sewers. That is where most of the killings in this movie happen. It's a nightmarish labyrinth that is dark and claustrophobic, where people are at their lowest. It's a place where humanity goes to die in both a literal and metaphoric way. It's a place below society where humans aren't meant to belong, unless they cast away their humanity and become monsters. The street level is where everyone lives. This is where we see normal people just going about their lives. This is society where humans belong. But Fusei and Kei both feel isolated here. They can't seem to exist with other people. And remember how I said most scenes in this movie have some form of motion in them? Well, that movement of the city and the people almost smothers and displaces the characters at times, swallowing them up where they're no longer individuals. It's a place where these two don't belong and can't seem to fit in. And then when they're at the rooftop theme park, high above the streets, they feel actually kinda safe. Like I said, this is the one place that has color, giving it this very distinct feel compared to the rest of the movie. It's also one of the very few places where characters open up and talk about what they actually want in this world. This place is surreal and almost feels like a dream, because, well, it is. This place represents something these characters want but can never have. A place above the world and society, in color. Somewhere where they feel safe and can be who they really are. The feelings they have here is what they want to achieve, having a place in the world among humans. But it's something that is unobtainable for either, which is seen directly through the chain link fence that separates them from the rest of the world. Much like a dream, this is a fleeting moment. This place, the feelings they harbor and the dream they want are all unobtainable, because the only place to go from here is down. Down to the sewers where this film started, where Fusei is revealed to be a part of Jin Roh, the Wolf Brigade. That secret and covert counterintelligence unit that operates inside the special unit. They were designed to protect its people from outside interference, so it turns out that Fusei has actually been playing Kei for a while, making the public security division think they have the upper hand. And just as Kei did, he developed feelings for her that he didn't plan on, even in that brief moment remarking that they could run away from all this. But this is where Fusei was going. This was his path. As he suits up in the Kerberos Protect gear, it's like a man slowly stripping himself of his humanity until there's nothing left. And unlike at the start of the movie, this time, he pulls the trigger. In a hailstorm of bullets, lead, and gore, without saying a single word, he disregards his humanity as he kills off the public security division that followed them down, unceremoniously, unremorsefully, behind that cold, red gaze. Or maybe not. Something to note in the final fight is that Fusei only fires once he's been shot at. He never shoots at someone who doesn't strike that first blow, which says to me that there is still a little bit of humanity left within him, only killing those who deserve it. Which is true, he does have some humanity left within him. And after that fight, after everything is laid to rest, where Fusei has killed off a number of the public security division units, Kei and him are alive with members of Jin Roh. It all looks like they've won, but there are no happy endings. Fusei's still in the Kerberos armor, but now with his head exposed, implying that there is just that smallest amount of humanity left within him, is given his final order: tie up loose ends. Kill Kei to not allow her to fall back into the public security division's hands, allowing for the Wolf Brigade to always have the upper hand. Fusei is left where he started this movie, given an order to kill someone he doesn't want to. But this time, it's someone who he actually has feelings for, and with a crying Kei screaming the lines of Little Red Riding Hood into him, in a split second, he makes his choice. Kei dies against him, and he accepts his place in the world and in the story. Fusei, now left a shell of a man, loses his humanity completely and becomes the wolf. What I love about this ending is how unfair it feels. There was no escaping this for either of them. That dream Kei so desperately wanted to run away was never possible. And if Fusei didn't shoot her, there was a marksman who would have taken the shot instead, and most likely would have killed him as well. No point in having a human in the pack of wolves. Kei and Fusei are so similar and have near identical stories in this. In fact, this ending scene is very reminiscent of Kei's words to Fusei before he went into that final battle.
What else could I do? What choice did I have?
In the end, nothing really mattered. There's still going to be fighting in this world, between protests and the government, and even between the special unit and the local police. If anything, this whole event accomplished nothing and just led to more death. But that fits because it wasn't possible to run from this world. Nothing changed for Fusei in this story. He went from killing for one oppressive system right into another. Jin Roh honestly doesn't seem too much better for him than the special unit, still using him as a pawn to better their own needs. It doesn't matter where he aligns himself, the higher ups are always going to use him and disregard him if he fails. Fusei was never an individual player in the story, he was always being led by someone else through every moment, and the few times his actual person shone through and his humanity showed, he was punished for it, both in a real and emotional way. After everything we saw in this movie, it was clear Fusei did have a feeling and a yearning to be a part of humanity, and did somewhat gain that through Kei and the little time they spent together. And maybe if she lived, she could have brought him back. But under a system like this, he didn't have a chance. The final shot of this movie shows the Little Red Riding Hood book buried in the scrapyard. This encapsulates pretty much the whole movie. It signifies that fairy tales aren't real. Stories don't play out like that in real life because the world isn't just plain good and evil. Little Red Riding Hood was constantly mimicked in the story and used to portray characters. It alluded to the idea that both characters are good and evil. Normally fairy tales tell us that good triumphs over evil, that there is a clear line between those two. But that's not really the case in real life. Fusei became the wolf in the end, but that wasn't really his choice. He just found himself being played by the world. Because the world isn't just black and white. And most importantly, we don't ever really get to have happy endings, no matter how much we want them. And something about watching that, something about how real this movie portrays its characters and themes and pretty much everything, where you are watching people fight a losing battle in a world that doesn't care for them, it reminds me of the Ampo protests. Why did a massive amount of Japan oppose Kishi and the security treaty so much? Because they were scared of their country getting brought back to the days of the war, where people would die and a lot of the time be forced to die for a country that didn't value them. That was the world of Jin Roh, a place that doesn't value the individual so long as it serves the purpose of whoever's in command. In Jin Roh, the world is built through oppression to remove your humanity. People aren't fighting for systems they believe in, they're just fighting for whoever tells them to. You will be forced to lose your humanity to be a part of the systems here. And in the end, Fusei chose complacency over individual freedom. He ultimately followed the path made for him without thinking for himself. If there's one final message of Jin Roh, something I think the movie would want to leave off on, it would be to think for yourself. Use your head. Don't allow yourself to get swept up in a system that would allow for something like this to happen. Come to your own understanding on where you stand in the world and don't be manipulated by any group ideology or movement that only wants to use you and don't care for who you are. Hold on to what you love and what makes you, well, human. No matter how cruel the world can get, don't allow for that little amount of happiness to be taken away from you. Because your happiness is something worth fighting for.